Hallo internet, Scotia Legacy Books. The following interview is actually taken out of episode number 12 of General McGill Alexander. That's where he talks about being taken hostage in Taiwan, and from that, two books arose. One's in English and one's in Chinese, both are still available. It's such a good story that I had to put it in on the legacy books as well. So I really hope you will enjoy this one. As I said, it's also in the episode 12 of the McGill's SADF videos, but it's really worth your while to listen to it and to get all of those books. It's fantastic. So without further ado, let us carry on.
We were about 2 months from going back home permanently. But now I had to get my office closed in those 2 months. And we got a message to say that Anne's dad was very, very ill. He was quite old. He was 80 years old. And it looked bad. It looked as if he wasn't going to make it. So I got permission for her to fly back. So she flew back. And even before anything, I'd been told that he's not going to make it. So you'd better come as well. So I got permission, and before I got back to South Africa, he'd died. So we were down there in the Cape for the funeral and so on, and to give her mom a bit of support and so on. And then we went back to Taiwan. And it was less than 2 weeks after we got back from his funeral that the hostage taking took place. 6 weeks before we were due to leave Taiwan. Now, as far as the events around the hostage taking is concerned, the safety and security in Taiwan was very different from South Africa, for instance. There was very, very little violent crime. Very little. There was quite a lot of white-collar crime, fraud and, that sort of thing. A lot of that took place. And you had to be very careful with transactions and so on, that you weren't diddled out of money. But violent crime, almost unheard of. It was safe for young women to walk around at night on the streets of Taiwan. They were safe. Children could walk about during the day in the streets. It really wasn't a big problem. You really didn't have to lock your windows and doors at night because people didn't break in. It was just not a problem. And the police they didn't take nonsense. They acted against criminals, and so it was a dicey business to get involved in crime. And the Taiwanese have the death penalty, and it was death by shooting. They shot you in the back of the head to execute you. They would do it for relatively small crimes by our standards. So they took no nonsense over there, and you didn't have violent crime. It wasn't prevalent there. I mean, it did take place, but there really wasn't very much. But then, about 7 months before this, a gang in Taiwan commenced with a reign of terror. It was a gang of 3 guys. And the leader of the gang was a fellow called Chen Cheng-shing. Now, Chen was, as far as I could ascertain later when I did some research into his background and so on, it seems that he'd been in the Taiwanese Marines for his national service, for his military conscription. So he'd been very well trained, because they offered probably the best training. The Marines and the paratroopers offered the best training in the Taiwanese military. So he'd been very well trained. But he'd grown up in bad circumstances, brought up by his grandmother, a very poor background, and been subjected to violence himself, and he'd been in and out of prison quite a few times for crimes that he had committed. But he'd become an habitual criminal. And this gang, they were guilty of murder, of rape, of arson, larceny, assault, intimidation, kidnapping, almost every crime you could think of, particularly those that involved some form of violence and destruction. Those are the sort of things that they were involved in, and their program of, I don't think it was a set program, but the actions that they did were intensifying, and people were getting very nervous about this gang, and the police couldn't catch them, they couldn't find them. Then they carried out something, a kidnapping, which shocked the whole of Taiwan. There was a television actor, not an actress, a presenter, television presenter, very well known in Taipei, Bai Bingbing. She, a very attractive woman and a very vital sort of announcer on TV. She had a daughter of 17 who was on her way to school, and she was kidnapped by these three. And they sent the mother a letter demanding a ransom. I think they asked for something like $5 million US dollars that they wanted in ransom. And just to show that they were deadly serious about this, they cut off her little finger and sent it to the mother with the ransom note. Now, the mother went to the police about it, which was the right thing to do. And so the police said, well, you make the arrangements with them that you're going to hand over the money, and we'll lay an ambush to catch them. And this is what they did. But the gang got wind of what was happening. And when they tried to arrange the whole ambush and the meeting and so on, everything went wrong, and these guys ran off. And they couldn't catch them. But they found out who they were and who the leader was. So they got hold of his wife, Chen's wife, Chen Chenxing's wife, and they arrested her as an accomplice, saying that she had been an accomplice to hiding the guys from the law and for keeping the girl who'd been kidnapped detained in the house. Now, whether that was so or not, we never really found out. But there was a lot of questions around that because it seems that she actually signed an admission of guilt, and she was sentenced to, I think, 12 years in prison as an accomplice. But in actual fact, further investigations proved that the police had tortured her until she signed the confession. Amongst other things, making her sit naked on a block of ice until she was nearly frozen. Things like that. So, there was a lot of questions around what actually happened and what didn't. I don't really know what did happen or not. But the fact is, these three guys, after the kidnapping and the ransom meeting went for a ball, they raped the young 17-year-old girl and killed her. And they turfed her body into a ditch on the side of the road, and the body was found there. So this produced an outcry in Taiwan, an absolute outcry. And the police launched a huge manhunt, but they couldn't seem to get these guys. And there was a shootout with the police. They eventually got information that they were in a certain part of the city, and they cornered them there. And there was a Wild West shootout, and in this highly populated, built-up area, and two of them got away. One of them was killed. Chen Chenxing got away with one of the other guys. And later they heard that there was that these guys were in a brothel somewhere, and the police went charging down the street with sirens blaring, and they arrived at the brothel and tried to surround it and Chen Shing and this other guy bailed out of the windows and were shooting at the police in the streets. And the one guy shot himself when he realized he'd been cornered by the police, and Chen Shing got away again. So now he's the only guy left. And all of this is in the media and in the newspapers and the television and so on. And the police are being accused of incompetence, and the people in Taiwan were feeling so insecure that they arranged a huge protest in front of the government buildings, demanding that the Minister of Police must resign because they can't catch these guys, and people are feeling insecure. It was a huge issue in Taiwan because nothing like this had ever happened before. When there were still two of them left, they decided that they're going to try and escape by changing their appearance. So they went into a plastic surgeon's office and they held him up at gunpoint. Him and his wife and his nurse. And they forced him to perform surgery on their eyes to try and change the shape of their eyes. And then they raped the wife and the nurse, and they shot all three of them dead, shot them in the back of the head. So these were bad guys. They were all sorts of reports appearing in the media. And these every time a report, people were seeing Chen Shing everywhere. There were wanted posters all over the city with the three guys' faces on them. And as each one would get shot in encounters with the police, they would draw a cross through that photo on the wanted posters. And eventually, they had crosses through two of the photos, and it was only Chen Shing's photo that was left there. And when a report would be received that Chen Shing had been seen in a certain area in Taipei, the property prices would drop. And they arrested or they kidnapped a couple of businessmen and then forced them to give them money. And so businessmen were leaving Taiwan to go and stay in other places. They were too frightened to stay there. It had become, because it was something like this was so unknown in Taiwan. It is unbelievable. People wouldn't go out at night. The streets of parts of Taipei city were deserted at night. You cannot believe the effect that all of this was having on the people. The TV coverage. There were three TV stations in Taiwan, and they were all giving major coverage to this thing. The Chen Shing then started sending letters. Nobody knew where he was, because what he did was he'd steal a scooter, because there's scooters all over Taiwan. He'd steal a scooter and he'd wear the helmet that with a visor on front, and he'd ride around with that, and so nobody would know that it's him. And then he'd dump the scooter and he'd steal another scooter somewhere, and then he'd take that and ride around. And so nobody knew where this guy was or how he was surviving or what was going on. And then he started sending letters to the press, to the media, saying, "My wife was not involved. I will hand myself over to the police," because he knew that the manhunt was closing in on him. They would get hold of him at some stage. Now, one also needs to know that Taiwan is a gun-free society. The only people who have guns in Taiwan are the police and the military. No one else. You're not allowed to own not any kind of private firearm in Taiwan. Nobody. But these guys had firearms. And, the crooks will get firearms. You can make any laws you like. The crooks will find a way to get firearms. And they had firearms, and they had plenty of ammunition too. So he sends these letters to the media, and he says, "My wife was not involved in the kidnapping. She had nothing to do with it. If you agree to retry her and have her acquitted and release her," because he knew she'd have to be retried because it was a court that had now sent her to. He said, "Then I will hand myself over to the police." So the government said, we don't negotiate with terrorists. No negotiations. We'll keep hunting you until we find you. So he realized he's got to now do something else to get his way, to get his wife free. He had 2 sons. He wanted his wife to go back to his sons and look after them, and then he was prepared to hand himself over. So he said, of course, he could have just decided to shoot himself, like at least one of the others did. And but anyway, this is what he said. He wants to, first of all, make sure his wife gets out of prison. So he realized the only way he's going to get the authorities to do something about it is he's got to take hostages and force their arm. But it won't help to take Chinese hostages, because he felt, and probably not without good cause, he felt that if he takes Chinese people hostage, the police will just rush in there and shoot everybody. But if he takes foreigners hostage, then they'll be a bit hesitant to do the same. So he goes to Paito, which is where we lived, a section called Cherry Hill, a lot of foreigners living there. He knew there were a lot of foreigners living there. And he scouted the area out, wearing his visor on his helmet on a scooter and so on. He scouted out the area, and he saw this house where there was a young American couple living. It was the house right next door to us. And this is the house that he decided he's going to take those Americans, he's going to take them hostage, and he's going to force the government's hand. If they don't, then he'll shoot the Americans and he'll shoot himself. And he selected a particular night, and that night he went and he broke into the house to try and take them hostage. And as luck would have it, they were, I don't know where, I think back in America at that stage. There was nobody in the house. So the people that he wanted to kidnap were not there, were to take hostage. So he left the house and he went back out into the street. And he was standing in the street in the dark. It was already dark at this stage, just about 7 o'clock or so. I'd been working late at the office because I had 6 weeks left in which to close down my office. I had a lot of work to do. I had to pack up a lot of stuff. Most of the stuff, secondhand stuff, I'd have to take back, and the people in the DFR didn't want the stuff, and I didn't want half of the stuff, so I had to find ways, and I had all sorts of things that I had to sort out, and I had to arrange visits to all the people to say farewell and sorry I'm going and nice to have known you and so on, just courtesy visits to all the various people before I closed down my office, and it was scheduled to be closed down on the 31st of December. Now, this was the 19th of November, so we had about 6 weeks to go. And I was late coming home, and Anne said to me, don't be too late, because remember, we'd bought some Pakistani carpets, very nice carpets to take home with us, but we'd found one of them was unraveling, wasn't so good. So we'd arranged with the Pakistani carpet salesman to come and bring others to us for us to have a look at, so we could choose a different carpet that evening, and he was going to come to our house so we didn't have to go out to him. And she said, the carpet salesman's coming this evening, so don't be late, too late. So I thought, if I can get home by about 7 or so, I think this guy was due to come at about 7:30 or so. Then we can, then it won't be too bad. So Chen is standing outside our house now in the dark, wondering what to do. And I come driving down the road. I didn't even see him. I didn't notice him. I mean, there are people out in the street, you don't even notice them. So, and my garage was on the street level, and it had a remote. It was operated by a remote. So I open the garage by the remote, and I drive in. And he sees, as I drive in, he sees my registration number, and it had a diplomatic registration number. So he knew immediately, foreigners. I can go there instead. I closed the garage door and I went upstairs. My daughter, Christine, 12 years old, she was busy practicing on the piano. She'd been taking piano lessons at the American school. She was busy practicing on the piano. So I greeted her, gave her a kiss, and I carried my briefcase and stuff up the stairs, up onto the landing, the mezzanine floor where the balcony overlooks the lounge. She was playing the piano down in the lounge. And up in that area, we had our TV and our computer and so on. And Melanie was sitting there with a little baby boy watching TV. And Anne was sitting on the computer, sending emails to people and so on. So I got up there and kissed them all hello, and I put my briefcase down, and I took little Zachary and put him on my lap and started playing with him. And I was, and just a few minutes I'd been there, and I heard Christine stop playing the piano. I didn't think anything of it. I thought, well, maybe she's finished her practice now, So, and I carried on chatting to Anne and to Melanie and bouncing the baby on my knee. And the next minute I hear Christine coming up the stairs. And as she comes up, I see there's somebody with her. And I thought, well, she's got a number of friends that she played with in the neighborhood. Yeah, and one of them has probably come in. And I didn't hear them ring the bell or anything, but, must be one of her friends coming up with her. And then I looked again and I saw it's a man that is bringing her up, or coming up just behind her. And as they came up from the stairs onto the landing and he came into the light, I saw he had a 9mm Beretta with a hammer cocked, pointed at her head. Yeah, I went cold then. And, it's the same pistol that was my service pistol back in South Africa. And I looked at him and I said, what do you want? And he ignored me, walked into the middle of the room, and he looked around, made sure that there was nobody else around. And with the pistol held against her head, he pushed her to one side and pulled out of his, he had these jackets that fly fishermen wear and photographers sometimes wear them, with lots of pockets. And he pulled out some cable ties. And he said to me, indicated I must stand up. Now, what had happened is, while Christine was busy playing there, he'd come up where our swimming pool was, and there was a window right entering into a laundry, just to a laundry from where the swimming pool was. There was no space around it for garden or anything. It's just a little swimming pool fitted in, and right in the front we had a tiny little patch of lawn in front of our front yard, our front door. He walked along next to the landing, next to the swimming pool, come to the window. The window was unlocked. He slid it open and climbed into the laundry, and he'd come along the laundry, and Christine didn't even hear him come in. But she suddenly saw movement while she was playing, and she turned around and she looked, and this guy was standing there pointing a pistol at her. And he indicated to her that she mustn't say anything. So she was terrified, And he then made her turn around, and he made her walk up the stairs with a pistol against her head. And as she came onto the landing, with this pistol being held against her head, her eyes turned towards me, and she said, "Dad, he's one of them." Now, she'd been seeing these posters on her way home she took the school bus. She used to walk about a block away from us. There was a corner with a little shop on it, and that's where she got on the bus, and where the bus dropped her in the afternoons when it brought her back. And on this corner, the lampposts, and next on the shop windows, they had these wanted posters. So she'd been able to see the photos, and she knew what these guys looked like. And she recognized Chen as soon as he was pointing the pistol at her. She knew who he was. So he made me stand up, and he indicated, "Turn around." And now he's got the cable tie, but he indicated I must turn around and put my hands behind my back. But he's got the pistol held against Christine's head. So I knew that once I'm tied up, there's nothing I can do. If I'm going to do anything, I've got to do it now, right now. This is the only chance that I've got in which I'm going to be able to do something. But he's standing there with a pistol cocked and his finger on the trigger and the barrel against my daughter's head. So my assessment of the situation was, I can do something now. I might be able to disarm him. I might even be able to kill him with his own weapon if I do disarm him. But the slightest move I make now, he's going to press that trigger. And is it worth seeing my daughter's head being blown off and disarming him and then killing him? I'm not prepared to do that. So I turned around and put my hands behind my back, and he tied my wrists together. So, I've thought about that quite a lot, and I've realized, I mean, I knew the Chileans had trained me. The South Africans had trained me. I knew how to disarm a man, but I also knew that in that split second that I move, he can press the trigger and he can blow my daughter's head off. So I just decided that it's not the right thing to do. So I turned around, put my hands behind my back, and he tied my wrists together with the cable ties. And then he pushed me down onto the chair, and he proceeded to tie Christine up and Melanie. By then, Anne had taken little Zachary and was holding him, and she had to sit there on the couch where they were all sitting together in a row. And he tied all their ankles together, mine as well. All our ankles were tied. And when he tied the ankles together, he then wanted to tie Anne's wrists. And she looked at him and she said, no. And she held the baby. She said, I've got to look after the baby. You can't tie my... And he looked at her and he looked at the baby. And then he nodded his head and he didn't tie her hands. So just her feet were tied together. So he then decided that he's now going to start making phone calls. So he takes the telephone and he phones the police. And he says to them, I'm at this place, and he gives the address. He says, I've taken this family hostage. He didn't know who we were. He didn't even understand what a diplomat was or anything else. But he says, I've taken this family hostage. Unless you publish, unless I see you, the writing on television, that you are going to retry my wife so that she can be acquitted, I'm going to kill these people. And then I'll just kill myself. He said, but I'm going to kill them first. So you can decide. Police didn't believe him. They thought they'd had so many false telephone calls and nonsense that, he started getting quite angry. And then he turned to us and he said, he held the telephone and he said, because now we had a language problem, because his home language was Taiwanese, which we had no concept of at all. But he also spoke Mandarin. But our Mandarin was, very, very limited. And his English was virtually non-existent. So he said to us, okay, held the telephone out, and he said, CNN, worldwide, CNN. And that's what he wanted. So where do you get the number? Now he wants us to phone CNN and tell them that we're being held hostage. How do you get the number for CNN? So Anne said to Melanie, Michael, that was her. She'd found a boyfriend in Taiwan. He was an American, and he was doing his master's degree in journalism, and he was doing a sort of an internship with an English language newspaper in Taiwan. and he was staying with his sister and or his aunt and her family, and his aunt was married to a guy who was working in Taiwan, so he was living with them, staying with them while he was there and doing this. I think he was doing about a 6-month internship as part of his course. And Melanie had met him through them, and they'd started seeing each other. So Anne said, well, he works in the newsroom of, I think it was the China News that he was at. Phone Michael and tell him. So Melanie, with her hands still tied behind her back, has now got to try and punch the figures into the telephone, because this was, cell phones were in their infancy. There weren't many cell phones around in those days. And so she manages to get this thing, and he holds the speaker to her ear and her mouth. And she manages to get hold of Michael on the phone, and she tells him what's happening. But she was getting quite hysterical. She was in quite a state at that stage already. And Michael just couldn't believe it. So he got hold of his news editor in the newsroom. And this guy didn't want to believe it either. But there was a guy in the newsroom from Agence France Presse. And he listened to this, and he decided that this is genuine. So he got hold of his people as well. And next thing is, there were media people scrambling around all over. But before they reached the house, the carpet salesman had arrived, and he presses the bell at the front gate, where the stairs are that lead up to our front door. And the buzzer starts going off for the intercom. And so Chen picks it up and he holds it to my ear, so that I can speak. So the guy says, we're here for the carpets. We want. So I said to him, look, you won't be able to sell any carpets tonight. He said, we've been taken hostage by Chen Shing. You must please get hold of the police. Tell them what is happening. Tell them they've got to believe this man. And this guy, he listened for a few minutes. He said, oh my goodness. And then he was disappeared. And he did get hold of the police as well and tell them that it was happening. So it wasn't very long before we had, as I subsequently found out, about 400 police surrounding our house. And of course, our house was part of a complex, a row of houses. So they were surrounding the whole neighborhood, really. And it wasn't long before an even greater number of media were there. Television crews, news reporters, radio reporters, newspaper reporters, every conceivable type. There were just dozens and dozens of them congregating around our house. Everybody wanted to see Chen Shing being shot by the police, because this was the biggest news story that Taiwan had had in years. All the time, all these years, it had just been the conflict between the mainland and Taiwan. Now suddenly they had this big story about these terrible murderers and criminals, and now the leader of the gang has been cornered in this house, and he's taken people hostage. And then the story got out that he's actually taken diplomats hostage. And not only had he taken diplomats hostage, he's taken South African diplomats. And Taiwan was at that stage at a very sensitive stage of the negotiations between South Africa and Taiwan on what sort of situation is going to exist in Taiwan after the 31st of December, which is 6 weeks away. How close are we going to have relations until then? So it was a very sensitive thing. And the government was very concerned about getting the best possible deal. Chen Shing had he had a bit of an ace up his sleeve with his fortuitous choice of hostages, and he didn't even fully realize it at that stage. So the process went on for a little while longer, and then a phone call came through. But in the meantime, I'd been saying to my family, listen, the police are going to launch an assault. I can see this is coming, and there's going to be shooting. I said, if shooting starts, just lie flat on the ground and don't move. Stay as flat as you possibly can on the ground. And our Anne's holding the little baby, and all of us are tied up with our hands behind our backs and our ankles tied together. And he tied them quite tightly. I could feel that I was losing, feeling in my hands from the tightness of those things. And at one point, I said to them, we need to start praying. And so we prayed as a family. We prayed out loud. And next thing is, the phone rings again. And when Chen picks it up, it's one of the deacons from the church who was phoning me the following night. We were having a meeting at the church, and he wanted to phone me to tell me that the meeting had been postponed to another night. And when Chen Ching heard that it was somebody speaking English on the other side, he gives me the phone, or holds it to my ear. Now, this all sounds surprising, but the fact is he wanted as many people as possible to know about this. He wanted the public to know that he had, because that restricted what the police could do, because they were in the public arena as much, and he was playing it very, very cleverly. So he was quite happy for me to tell anybody I wanted to, because he had in the meantime built up barricades. After he tied us up, he barricaded the stairs. We had stairs going down that he'd come up from the garage and the kitchen and dining room and lounge down below. And there were stairs going up from the landing, going up to the bedrooms. And the houses were all close together. So the police would be able to go up into one house and from there put a bridge across to our roof and then enter from the top and come down. So he barricaded both the stairs leading up towards him and the stairs coming down towards him. He barricaded them with furniture and so on, and made it very difficult for anyone to get over. And of course, the stairs had sharp turns in them. So you'd only realize as you come around the corner that that they've been barricaded. So it was a difficult situation for the police at this stage. And he'd locked all the doors and made sure everything was closed. And he put off all the lights in the house. And so everything was in darkness and nobody could see anything going on inside. So he now has to try and persuade the police to negotiate with him. But the police, and one has to understand that the Taiwanese law enforcement situation, I don't know if it's still like that, but at that stage they worked on a bounty system. If a man was wanted, they'd place a price on his head. And the policeman who captured him or killed him, if it was a very serious crime, who actually killed him, would be paid that bounty, and it was a substantial amount of money. And in Chen's case, they'd said that whoever manages to capture or kill this guy will get a 2-grade promotion and a cash amount of, I can't remember what it was, but it was a substantial number of new Taiwanese dollars that he would get. So every policeman wanted to be the one who gets that bounty and wanted to be the one who actually takes Chen Ching out. And now they've got policemen all around this house, and every one of them wants to be the one who wants. So now they want to try and goad him into doing something that will enable them to kill him. They weren't interested in the hostages at all. So they keep phoning him on the intercom, and he answers the intercom, and then the policeman starts swearing at him and calling him names and cursing him and getting him really worked up and getting him really angry. And then he would bang down the receiver on the intercom set. And then they'd phone again, and he'd pick it up, and they'd start this whole business again. And he'd start yelling and shouting at them, and he'd bang. And eventually he got so angry that he grabbed the whole intercom set and ripped it out of the wall and flung it down on the ground. And by now you can see this guy is quite enraged. because the police they're not playing the game. They're not doing what he wants them to do. And the whole thing's now becoming, it's on a bit of a knife edge. You can see that this guy's getting angry and he's going to do something completely irrational soon. And eventually they stand outside now and they start yelling at him from outside and taunting him and saying, "Why don't you come out here? Come on, we'll show you what a real man is." And it was really getting out of hand. And I could just see that we were leading up to something really bad now. And the next thing is he grabs Melanie, my 22-year-old daughter, and he holds her in front of him like a shield, and he leans over the balcony, and these guys carry on, and in front you could see the shadows from the street lights as these guys were moving across in front of the house. You could see the shadows on the curtains we had huge high curtains in the lounge, big windows, and you could see the shadows on these curtains that he'd drawn all the curtains. And he was getting absolutely fed up. And the next minute he lost it, and he fired a shot through the window at the police. Man, the police had AR-15 rifles and automatic assault rifles and pistols and submachine guns. The next minute it sounded as if all hell had broken loose. They all opened up. There were bullets flying everywhere, all over the place. And this guy went crazy, and he pulled Melanie in front of him, and he starts firing back at them, you see. So now we've got a raging gun battle going on over here. And the next thing is he pulls out a second gun, and it was a Glock. But he's got a 32-round magazine. He had two of those 32-round magazines. Jams it into the Glock, and now the Glock can fire on automatic. And the police are now firing at the door to try and break down the door so they can get in through the door. And now he opens up with a Glock. He fires at the door, fires a bit, and the whole front door is spattered with bullet holes. And of course, then the police back off now. But of course, it's low velocity. It's 9mm bullets that are being fired. So they don't, and it was a thick door with, metal on it. And so they penetrate the first part, but they don't go through the rest. But then firing from outside, they're firing with high velocity assault rifles. And those rounds are going through. And they're coming into us, and the windows are all shattered. And downstairs, we had a huge chandelier in our lounge. And you could see it from where we were on the landing, where the balcony was, the internal balcony. And that's all the glass from the chandeliers were shattered. And I had a whole tray of a bench full of CDs that I'd bought. There were some very good CDs I got in Taiwan, and I had a whole collection of CDs. Bullets going through this lot, my CDs being shattered, and pictures on the wall being shot down, and it was absolute chaos inside there. What was going on? So I'm yelling at my family to just lie flat and to take cover. Of course, there were at least 3 occasions. The shooting would subside, and then it would start again, and then it would subside, and it would start again. And this guy his pockets were bulging. He had stacks of ammunition, and he had a third pistol, which I didn't even see. I only saw it at a later stage after I was no longer there. But he had a third pistol, so he was well armed and well prepared for this whole thing. And Anna's is lying in the one corner with the little baby, and one of the bullets hits the wall above her, flattens, and falls down on her head. We still got that flattened piece of lead somewhere that, Anne's lying, covering the baby, and the bullet lands on her head as it's spent. And so now I'm praying out loud. I yelling at the police not to come in here, but they don't understand what I'm saying. They can't speak English. There's just this gunfight going on, and I'm yelling at them, and I'm praying out loud. And eventually I I couldn't think of anything more to pray. And I started praying in tongues. And my daughter Melanie was joining me because the family were all praying. And then Melanie was praying in tongues as well. And we were, and you know, eventually I reached the point where I felt, I don't know what to pray anymore. You know, I don't know what to do. I mean, you know, I kept yelling at him, leave my daughter alone. Take me as the shield, because he's using her as a human shield. And she was getting hysterical because there are bullets flying around all over her. And when he's firing this way and firing that way, the bullets are being ejected. The empty cartridges are being ejected from the gun. He's got two guns now. He's holding her, but and she's tied up, and he's got a gun in each hand. And the empty cartridge cases that have been ejected are hitting her in the face. And you know, I mean, what do you do in a situation like that? And I keep saying to him, leave her, take me, and he does, because of course the Chinese are not big people, and I'm a big person in their view. He didn't want to take a big guy. He wanted my daughter. She was a light, slim person, easy to move around. That's what he wanted. So I was really concerned now. I mean, there's this absolute indiscriminate firing that's going on. And then it dies down. And then he yells at Christine, who's only 12. And he points to the bottom of the stairs that are leading up to the top. Because he's now sitting on the couch and near the edge of the parapet, and he's looking straight at the stairs that are coming up from down, but he can't keep an eye on the stairs that are coming from the top. So he yells at Christine that she must move across there and warn him if there's somebody coming down the stairs. So Christine looks at me, you know, and I said, Christine, do as he tells you. And she says, looks at me, she says, but Dad, he's the bad guy. So I said to her, Christine, don't give me any lip, just do as I say. Get over there and do as he says, because he's going to shoot somebody. So she scrambles across as best she can and gets to the corner there and where the stairs are, and watches this. And the next minute, he another round of shooting breaks out. And he starts firing at the stairs. No, I'm getting it wrong now. This was before this happened. We're praying, and I don't know what to pray anymore. And the shooting is going on. This was, I think, the third time that the shooting had started. So he just before the third time, he for some reason he decided he's now going to leave Melanie, and he hurls her down on the ground, and he grabs me. I think he just thought that I'd give him more protection because I'm bigger than what she was. So she's lying on the ground now, still tied up, and tries to half crawl under a little coffee table in the corner here. And now he pushes me down on the couch, and I'm sitting on the couch with him next to me, with one pistol against my head, and the other pistol pointed down at the stairs in case the police come in now, because they're going to, you just know they're going to come in at any stage. And I'm sitting now tied up, trussed up like a chicken here, with him right next to me, and he's now watching like this, you see. And at this stage, I hear our garage door downstairs. I hear it opening. So the police have now managed to open the garage door. So now I know they've penetrated the house. The assault's going to take place. So I yell out loud in English. I say, I know you people are down there. Don't come upstairs. Don't carry out an assault now. He's going to kill all of us. Don't do anything now. I can hear movement down below. I don't know whether he heard it or not, but he's now holding me as the shield, and he's waiting for somebody to come up those stairs. And there's a twist in the stairs, and then there's the barricade. And Christine is now on the far side above those stairs over there, at the bottom of those stairs. But she's terrified now, you see. And this guy, the police then launch their assault. We hear them coming up the stairs, boom, 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 as they start running up the stairs. And they've got bulletproof face masks on. They've got body armor. They've got shields. And it's a narrow space. They can't really move much inside there. And they've got their pistols as they come around the corner. And they come around the corner and they run right into this barricade, and they can't get past that. And as they come around and to get past that, the Chin opens fire on him. But he's now got the pistol against my head, and he's firing down at the guys as they're coming up the stairs. And apparently he didn't manage to hit any of them. He must have hit their shields and their face masks and their body armor and all the rest of it. But they come on in the darkness. I can see the guys milling around, and they can't get past the barricade. And he's firing away at them. And eventually they're forced to fall back because they can't do anything else and go around the corner. And as he's firing at them, he turns around and he just to make sure, he fires a couple of shots at the stairs coming down. He didn't know whether there was anyone coming down. There wasn't anybody, but he fires. And Christine is lying there, and she sees him turn around and the pistol point towards her, and she sees the flash. Much later, when Anna's lying there, Anne's trying to get to sleep with the kids and so on, in this corner, she says, "The floor's all wet over here." She says, what is this? And Christine looks at her and she says, "When you were shooting at me, I wet myself." So anyway, but now he's firing at these guys, and he wants to bring more fire to bear to get them to retreat. So he pulls the pistol that he's had against my head, he pulls it away, and as he brings it across to shoot at them, he fires a shot too soon. And the shot goes through my left knee, right through my knee, and my daughter's lying down on the ground floor in front of me, sort of off to one side. And that same bullet goes through my knee, into her wrist, on her back, through her wrist, and into her back, just misses her spine. And she screams. And I yell because of the bullet shot through because it felt like my knee was, exploding. And I can't do anything because, my hands are behind my back and my ankles are tied together. And they retreated now. That was the last firefight. Now, just before that firefight took place in the previous one, when I no longer knew what to pray or the only thing I could think of was Psalm 23. So I started to recite Psalm 23. And when I reached the point where I said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," I felt such an emotion coming up inside of me because I realized we're in the shadow of death now. There's all the shooting going on around us. I'm likely to see my family shot to death in front of me now. Or they're likely to see me shot to death in front of them. Or we're all likely to die. This is crazy. These police are not interested in what happens to us. They're prepared to shoot us to death so they can get this guy. And when I said those words, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," it had such an emotional impact on me. I just felt the emotion welling up inside of me. But then, strangely, the shooting subsided and it stopped. And then it was all quiet until they launched the assault and they came up those stairs. Then it went wild again. Then the shooting was going crazy. And that's when Christine thought he was trying to shoot her. He wasn't trying to shoot her. He was just firing shots up at the stairs to deter anybody who might be coming down. But she just saw the pistol swing towards her and the flash as the firing started. And with the other pistol, he swings it around and he starts firing, and the bullet goes through my leg and into my daughter. So there's chaos, and now the police have retreated. They went right out of the house again. And Melanie's screaming and I'm moaning, and I yelled at her. I said, Melanie, are you all right? And she says, I've been shot. And I said to her, where? She said, in my back. And I thought of her spine. And I said, whatever you do, don't move. She said, but it hurts so. I said, just don't move, don't move. Because I didn't want her to damage her spine anymore if the spine had been hit. And then Anne, I feel that I try to move my leg to see if it's okay. And I feel that my leg is sliding around. And then I realize that it's wet down below. And then I realized that that's the blood from my leg that has run down my leg onto the floor. And that's what my foot is sliding around on. And I'd just been reading a book on the Vietnam War. And they had described somebody who had been shot and was bleeding. And he was talking to everyone and he was fine. And the next minute he was dead. And I remembered Leon van Wyk, my company second in command, who had tried to break into that house when the insurgent was inside it and had been shot with the AK-47. And he'd been the same. He'd been in the ambulance talking to the guys, and he was okay. He was talking to them, quite lucid. And the next minute he was dead. And I thought to myself, I could die anytime now. So as I realized that, I didn't know how bad this was. I just knew that I'm losing a lot of blood, and I was already starting to feel a little bit faint. And I don't know whether it was the pressure or everything that was going on, or the amount of blood I was losing, or what it was. But I shouted out to the rest of the family. I said, Anne, I think I might be going. I said, whatever happens, just trust in Jesus. Keep praying and trust in Jesus. And I was hoping if I said, I think I might be going, that Christine wouldn't understand what I was saying. She knew immediately what I was saying. And she came crawling across from where she'd been lying down. And he'd actually loosened her wrists at that stage. At one stage, Anne asked if she could untie her wrists. So her feet were still tied together, but her wrists were loose. And she came crawling across to me and she grabbed my leg. Fortunately, not the one that was bleeding, but the other one. And she held and she said, "Daddy, don't die, Daddy." And and I kept feeling as if I'm going to pass out. And the next minute, there's a yelling between this guy and the police, and I hear an exchange. Now they were talking Taiwanese, and I couldn't follow any of what they were saying. And what I heard later was he said, some of these people have been shot, send a doctor up. Now, there was no doctor down there. They didn't have anybody like that there. And so, now the guy who's speaking to him answers. And the next minute, I hear somebody running up the stairs. Somebody entered the house, jumped through one of the broken windows and came running up the stairs. Now, I don't know what it is, but Chen Chen Singh is standing there with two pistols like this. And this guy in the dark, I can just see this guy in a police uniform come running in. And he runs and he holds his hands up like this. And in the meantime, when I'd said to Anne, I think I'm going, because I said, I'm losing a lot of blood. She left the baby and she came crawling across the floor to where I was. She wasn't going to stand up because the shooting could start again at any minute. And she said, where? And I said, my left leg. And I said, you've got to stop the bleeding. And she said, with what? And she sort of looked around and then she looked up at me, and I still had my tie on that I'd been wearing, because I wore civilian clothes to the office every day. There's only to actual functions and things that I would wear my uniform. She looked up and she saw the tie. It was my school old boys tie that I was wearing that day. And she said, your tie. And she quickly untied my tie from around my neck, and she tied a tourniquet around my knee, around above my knee. And that stopped the bleeding. She tied it quite tight. And the next minute is this guy comes running up the stairs. And as he comes in, there's a sudden exchange, and this guy with his pistols, holding one pistol pointed at the guy, he feels around his body for any arms, and he stops on his belt and he yells something at him, and the guy answers him. I found out afterwards the guy had a pager on his belt for paging people, and this guy felt that, and the guy said to him, "No, that's just my pager." And then he felt, and he realized it wasn't a weapon, so he left that, and then he turned around and he pointed to me and my daughter, and he said, "These are the two that have been wounded." So the guy goes down towards Melanie, and he says, "No, that one's not hurt badly. Leave her there. Take this one," pointing to me. So, this guy knew what this guy was, and he didn't want to leave a young, attractive woman with him for any time. He didn't know how badly Melanie was hurt or something, but he wanted to get her out of there. So this guy had agreed to him taking 2 hostages out. So he went down to pick Melanie up, but her wrists were still tied. So he tried to force them apart and break the what she was tied with, and he didn't realize that she had a bullet through her hand, at least through her wrist, and he managed to actually break I don't think she was tied with a cable tie. I think he'd used rope or something, or string, but he managed to break this and get her arms apart, and she screamed from the pain in her hand and her wrist, and she turned around and held up her hand like this, and she could actually see right through the hole right through her wrist. So he then picked her up, and he carried her downstairs and took her out, and handed her through the window to some of the other guys, and then he came running back up for me. And he grabbed me, but I was a bit big to carry. And at this stage, I was sort of drifting close to unconsciousness. And he started pulling me, dragging me down the stairs, because he jumped over the barricade. And he dragged me over the barricade. And the next day, we found a whole trail of blood from my leg and the way that he dragged me out. And as he got down to the bottom of the stairs with me, and he was dragging me along, my glasses fell off. And I still remember thinking to myself, how am I going to read now without my glasses? But he got me to the window, and he managed to lift me up high enough for some of the policemen to reach through, and they were all busy with their butts of their pistols breaking the glass out so they could get me out without cutting me. And they dragged me out, and then the guy yelled at them from upstairs. He said, "No more, you're not coming up here again. You come up here again, I'm going to shoot you." And that guy was incredibly brave. I mean, what he did to come up there and get us out of there, he could have been shot quite easily. And I found out afterwards that this guy, his name was Ho Yo Yi, he was the chief of police in that area, and he was the guy who had been placed in charge of the whole Chen Shing investigation. And he had not been notified. He'd been in a different part of Taipei, and the policemen who'd come around were not under his command. They were all just bounty hunters. They were just looking for wanting to kill Chen Shing. And he was the guy who had training in negotiating and knew something about these things, and had SWAT teams under at his disposal and so on. And he then took charge, and got the other police, told them to move. They hadn't thrown a cordon around the house. Civilians were pushing in all over. They all wanted to see Chen Shing being killed. They had no concept of what the danger was that was involved. And when I got out, they put me onto a gurney, one of these stretchers on wheels. And my daughter was there, and I was still surprised that, we were both still there. We hadn't, and they couldn't get us to the ambulance because there were too many people. There were people from the media crowding, and I was lying on the gurney, and there were guys shoving microphones in my face saying, "How many people are in the house? What did Mr. Chen say? What's going on there? Has anybody been killed?" And lights shining and flashing from photographs, and my daughter's lying next to, just a little short way from me on the gurney, and she's screaming from the pain, and they can't get the gurney through the crowds, and the people are trying to get her to say something, and I was so angry, and at that stage I was sort of off under the impression the whole thing's over, he's given up now and we're all going to get out. And then through the sort of mists of semi-consciousness, I realized Anne's still inside there. She's not going to get out. And Christina's still there, and the baby's still there. And I was so angry that I just sort of forced myself to wake up and stop feeling relaxed and this is all over. And with all these people screaming and shouting around me, and the chaos, and there's absolutely no control at all, and the ambulance men can't get us to the ambulance, and I jumped up and I grabbed some of the people and pulled them aside, and I said, I want my wife and children out of there. Get who's in charge here? And I thought to myself, nobody seems to be in charge. I better take charge of this thing. And I'd forgotten about my knee by that time. So I jumped off of the gurney, to try and get some order into this chaos. And as soon as my leg touched the ground, I went over, as if I'd been poleaxed. And then I realized you cannot do anything. And, for the second time that night, I felt the sense of total, complete helplessness. The first was when we'd been tied up and the whole thing started. And I realized I cannot do anything. I was in charge of a parachute brigade. I had 7,000 people under my command. If I said something, the people did it. And here I'm sitting. I can't do anything. One man has got control of me and my family. I've lost all control. And that feeling of helplessness was difficult to describe, something like that. And the second time was when I hit the ground after jumping off of that gurney, and I realized I can't do anything. I'm useless. People can't understand me. Nobody knows who I am. It's just a total waste of time. And they pushed me back onto the gurney, and they eventually started finding a bit of space and pushing me through and getting Melanie through. And they put us each into a separate ambulance, and they drove off with us. And when they drove off, the reporters were still trying to take photographs through the window of the ambulance, and the TV cameras running along next to the ambulance while it tried to make its way through the crowds, trying to take pictures of everything. They were like a crowd of vultures, man, coming in, hyenas coming in from or wild dogs trying to eat an animal while it's still alive. It was a nightmare situation. Anyway. We ended up, both of us in hospital. They took us to the Veterans General Hospital, which I'd visited before, and so visits as a military attaché and so on. Now suddenly I'm a patient in. Melanie went straight into surgery because the bullet had lodged inside her pelvis area, a pelvic area, and they had to remove the bullet, and they had to perform surgery on her immediately. There was nothing surgery could do to me, so they cleaned up my wound and bandaged it and so on, and I was put into a ward, and there was a TV in the ward, so I could follow what was going on. A lot of these things I only found out about at a later stage, when I did some investigation, when I tried to write the story of of everything that took place. And then it was a night of uncertainty. I'd only been there for about 2 hours before I was evacuated. That's when the gun battle, he'd only been holding us for about 2 hours. And I know that because we had a cuckoo clock downstairs, and every hour and half hour the cuckoo would sound off, so I could keep track of the time. So it was, it was only a little after 9 o'clock at night by the time I was taken out. And I'm telling you what I can recall now, but I'm also telling you that there are lots of things that were happening that I'm leaving out now, that I've either forgotten about, or that there just isn't time to detail all the things. But during that night, there were a couple of things that happened. First of all, going back to the house. Now Anne is sitting there. She's seen her husband and her daughter being carried out, both of them have been shot. she doesn't know what's going to happen next. She doesn't know what's happened to her. She doesn't know what situation we're in. I was saying to her, I think I'm going. She doesn't know whether I'm still alive. She doesn't know anything. But she's sitting there now. But, Anne's nature is such that she can accept a thing, and she's very practical, and she doesn't let those things that she can't do anything about bother her to the extent that she becomes immobile. So, one of the things, and decides now, things are quieted down. And now what I found out later was, at this point, the Taiwanese cabinet had met, and a cabinet decision had been made that no further shooting is to take place. And the police had now been instructed, under no circumstances, any shooting. Nobody's life must be endangered at all, not even Chen's at this stage, because they were worried about us. So all of a sudden things start changing, things quiet down, and there's no more shooting, and it's all got quiet there, and there are exchanges, people shouting backwards and forwards and so on, but there's nothing much happening. The telephones are still working, and Chen starts talking to people on the telephone. So Anne wants to go to the toilet. But, she's got to go downstairs or upstairs if she wants to go to the toilet. And now she's got to get Chen to let her go to the toilet. So she tries to tell him, but her Mandarin is not so good. Now, everything depends on the tone you use. And he can't understand what she's saying. And she eventually she says, well, she's not going to give him a demonstration of what she wants to do now. He's got to, but eventually he manages to figure it out. So he allows her to go to the toilet, but Christina's got to stay behind, and the baby's got to stay behind. And then Anne realizes now, he's busy talking to people on the phone. She's not going to, there's nothing more she can do. It's getting late. She may as well try and get some sleep. So she manages to say to him, look, I want to go to bed. Can I go to bed now? And he looks at her in horror, and he says, no, you can't go to bed. You're staying right here. So she says, okay, well, can I get some bedding down here so that I can go to sleep on the bed, on the floor? So he says, you can send Christine to get it. So Christine goes upstairs and gets some pillows and some duvets and other things and brings them down, and settles down with the little one and with Christine and so on. Now, Chen's busy with his conversations, and he phones TV stations, the 3 TV stations. He phones and answers for these TV stations, and he talks to them. So the police wanted to now negotiate with him, but they can't get hold of him because he's on the phone to these TV stations. And the TV anchors, this is great because this is all being broadcast all over. The 3 TV stations in Taiwan stopped all their scheduled programs, and they just focused. They were outside the house photographing what was going on. Everything was just covering this hostage gun battle. And now he's talking, and he's telling his whole life story to the TV anchor, and telling them how things happened and what went wrong and so on in his life, and why he's doing this, and how it's important it is that his wife gets retried. And then he says, I don't, and they ask him about the hostages. He says, I don't understand these people. He says, they keep praying, but I don't know who they're praying to. I don't know what this is about. They keep praying all the time. And a little later, while he's talking to them, Christine now can't get to sleep. So her school bag is lying fairly nearby, and she pulls her school bag over and she opens it up, and she gets some paper out of it and a pen, and she starts drawing a picture there in a sort of semi-darkness. And she draws a heart with a cross in the middle. And across the cross, she writes, I love you.
I love God.
I love God. I love God. And then she writes a little prayer on the top. She writes, Dear Lord Jesus, please look after Daddy and Melanie. And please let us get out of here safely. And at the bottom, she says, lots of love, Mommy and Christine. And this guy is watching her and talking to the TV anchor while he's watching her. And eventually he leans across and he takes a piece of paper from her and he looks at it. And he can't read it as such, but now he describes it to the TV anchor, and he says he doesn't know what this is all about. So the TV anchor says to him, after he described the cross and so on, he says, well, these people are Christians, and they are praying to God as Christians, and they are praying to Jesus. And he says, well, he was, had been brought up a Buddhist, and he doesn't mean anything to him. So anyway, the next morning, negotiations start. Now, through all of this, I've been lying in the hospital and people start coming through to me. Chris Dippenaar, the Dutch Reformed dominee, who's a lecturer at the Taiwan, the theological college. Now, he comes through and he says to me, Mac, let me help you with what's going on. And he sat next to my bed the whole time, and he translated everything that was on the TV so that I would know exactly what is happening at any particular stage. And I'm eternally grateful to him for that. So that meant that I could keep abreast of what was going on. He sat there right next to me. Anne's doctor, she would see him for asthma and occasional blood pressure problems and so on, and he prescribed medicines to her. He came to see me. As a doctor, he managed to get access to the ward and come in. And he said to me, please, and he's got a package there with a whole lot of medication in it. And he says, please. Now, he was a Christian Chinese. He was crying. And he's crying as he comes in there. And he says, please, Colonel, please, I've got to get this medicine to your wife. Can't you arrange that they will allow me to go into the house so that I can give her a medicine so that she'll be all right? So I said to him, well, doctor, no, I appreciate your concern, but really there's nothing I can do, my cousin's son, Matthew, my second cousin, he pitches up there, and he hangs around all the time to sort of, and stands in as our family spokesman. And he's Taiwanese, or he's Mandarin, had reached quite a high level at that stage. So he could actually speak to the media and make little statements and so on our behalf. And I was very grateful to him for also helping us out with that as well. While all this is going on now inside the house, the negotiations, and just to go through very briefly what happened, Chen's wife was brought from prison to participate in the negotiations. They felt that if she was there, she could help persuade him to release some of the other hostages, and it would be useful and there was a woman there as well who spoke some English, and it was obviously good for her to be there because no one else who was involved in the negotiations could speak English. So this woman was a useful person to have there at that stage. And there was a human rights lawyer called Frank Scheer. Now, Frank Scheer was an opposition politician, but he came in and offered his services as a negotiator, and he was allowed into the house. So they had this woman, Chen's wife, and Frank Scheer, who came into the house, and there was all of this, the negotiation going on. And while all this is going on, Anne is sitting on her computer because he'd now cut her bonds and so on, so she wasn't tied up anymore. But he's sitting there with his 3 pistols and all his ammunition and his magazines and so on in front of him, and discussing the negotiations are going on between him and the others. And Anne's on the computer sending emails to all the family and friends in South Africa and elsewhere, telling them we're okay. And by then she'd had a chance to actually phone me in the hospital. And she found out what was going on, and her mind had been set at ease that Melanie had come back from the surgery. They said she was going to be okay. but she'd been badly hurt, and so she would be staying in hospital for quite a while. And so I could set Anne's mind at rest about that as well. And it was a great relief to me to be able to actually hear her when she was over there. And then a very bizarre thing happens. This woman who speaks English, while the others are busy talking, and Frank Shear is busy with heavy negotiations with Chen Shing. This woman says to Anne, "You're looking very tired. Would it help if I gave you a bit of a massage?" And so Anne said, "Oh, that would be lovely. I'd really appreciate that." And then she says, "But wait a minute. Chen Shing's wife is a trained masseur. She can massage you." So she speaks to Chen Shing's wife, and there, while the negotiations are going on, Chen's wife is busy massaging Anne on the floor there to ease the tension in her body. So that was quite bizarre that sort of thing happened. While I'm in the hospital, I start getting phone calls, lots of phone calls. People, what has happened is the guy, the deacon who phoned me to tell me about the meeting, and I told him that we're being held hostage, and it's Chen Shing, and this is what's going on. He then immediately got hold of Pastor Bill from the church, and all the other people in the church were notified. And most of them, as I say, were expatriates, and they all immediately notified their families. And within literally minutes of me having told the deacon about what was going on, the message had gone out to Christian friends all over the world. In Australia, in New Zealand, in the US, in South Africa, in the UK, in Canada, in Italy, in Czechoslovakia, and all sorts of places where there were people. The message had gone out, and Christians were praying. So there was a prayer chain around the world. And by the time this prayer chain got going, was around about the time that the shooting came to an end. And we Melanie and I were evacuated, and things calmed down. I got a personal phone call from General George Mayram. As soon as he heard about it, he tried to find out and where I was, and then he phoned the military, the embassy people, and they were able to tell him that I was in the hospital, and they gave my phone number to him, and he phoned me, and I appreciated that. That was a very good gesture on his part. I got a phone call from the director of foreign relations at the military, this naval commodore. It was around about the first time I'd heard from him in the whole time I'd been in Taiwan. I mean, he just wasn't interested in Taiwan. I just never heard from him about anything. He got the lower down guys to talk to me. All of a sudden, he phoned me. And he said, "What can we do to help you?" And I said, "Look, the one thing I want you to do is to get hold of my daughter in the Air Force, Shona, our second daughter. Just tell her what has happened, and please keep her informed." He said, "That's no problem. We'll organize that for you immediately." So I said, "Well, that's all I want you to do for me at this stage. And I just want to get my wife out of there." They said, "Don't you worry about that. You don't worry about anything back in South Africa. We'll sort it all out." In my innocence, I believed him. And so I let that go. I stopped worrying about Shona, and I stopped worrying about, her, what she would hear about. Because obviously all of this is on the media all around the world. And I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what nonsense they're talking. I do know that they often talk a lot of nonsense. We had lots of close friends who phoned me. I can't even remember all the people who phoned me. I had old school friends who phoned me. I had people from the military, friends who phoned me, and well wishers and so on, all over the place. We had family who got hold of me. During the rest of the day, there were successive releases. There was a whole series of negotiations that I won't go into detail with about now. But first of all, they let the baby go. So the baby was handed through the door, through the window, and it went, and some of our friends from the embassy looked after the little baby. Then they agreed to let Christine go. Now Christine had already, shown a great deal of courage, because at one stage, what Anne wanted to do was Chen was hogging the telephone all the time. So Anne wanted to make some phone calls as well. But she decided, she knew I had a cell phone in my car. I kept it in my car. It's the only place I used it, It was in the early days of cell phone. It was one of these things that looked like a brick, And anyway, she wanted to get the cell phone. So she said to Chen, can we go and fetch the cell phone down in the car? And he eventually understood what she was saying, and he said, yes, okay, she can go down. But Christine can go down and fetch it. Anne's got to stay up there with him. So Christine goes down. And she decides when she gets down there, she gets the cell phone, but she decides she wants to see what's going on outside. So she opens the garage door and she steps out into the street. And immediately there are policemen there with rifles and pistols and things, because they expect Chen to come out with her, you see. And they're going to shoot him the moment they see him. So they see Chen's not there, and it's only Christine. And she looks around, she's big eyes at all these guns pointing at her. And so one of the guys says, come with us, you mustn't go back inside, come to us. And so Christine looks at them and she says, if I don't go back inside, he's going to kill my mom. He said, and you people, all you do is shoot and you don't do anything. You're not getting us out of here. You must do something about getting us out of here. And she turns around, she goes back inside and closes the door, and she goes back upstairs to Anne. Anne then had the cell phone, and she was able to make some calls on that and sort out a few things. So sort of midway through the afternoon, they managed to negotiate Christine's release. By then, Christine had fallen asleep. So Anne wakes her up and says, Christine, he's agreed to let you go. You must go. You go downstairs and they'll help you through the window. So she says, I'm not going until you get released. I'm staying with you. So Anne says to her, no, because Anne knew that, we just got to get as many people away from this man as possible. So she said, no, you go downstairs. I'll be back. I'll be down soon and I'll be able to join you. So Christine goes down and they take her through the window, and the police fetch her outside, and one of the people from the embassy, Wouter Badenhorst, collects her and grabs her and gives her a hug and takes her off. And then she was taken to join me up in the hospital. But she was okay. She hadn't been injured at all. They keep saying they're going to come out now. Chen has surrendered, and then a half an hour will go and nothing happens. And I'm getting frantic now because Anna's the only one left, and I don't know whether she's going to be coming out or not. And eventually he agrees to this, and so the TV cameras are all on our front door, and there Chen comes out with Ho Yo Yi, the police chief, next to him, with another policeman holding a bag with all his pistols and his ammunition in, and Ho Yo Yi is handcuffed, and next to him is his wife holding his arm, and they walk down the steps, and behind them comes Frank Scheer, the negotiating inside there. What's happened to Anne? I find out later that two things happened to Anne. The first is, as they're about to go out, she says, just a moment, I just want to change into something that looks a little more presentable. That's, I'm a bit crumpled and dirty from this. I want to put on something else. So now everybody's got to wait while she runs upstairs and makes herself look pretty and combs her hair a bit and so on. Then she comes down, and now they start moving out, and the others are all gone out already. And she's, oh, just a minute, we had two cats in Taiwan. We brought one of them over, both of them over from South Africa, and they stayed with us over there. And she's now concerned about the cat. She says, I don't know when I'm going to be coming back. Let me just go and put out food for the cats. So she goes into the kitchen and she gets food for the cats and sits, and then she comes out. So I'm sitting there in the hospital just about frantic because I don't see any sign. And next thing is Anne comes out, broad smile on her face. And the same smile that I fell in love with all those years ago, 25 years before that, when I was saw her for the first time at the Goodwood Showground. So so I was so relieved when I saw her come out. It was just such an incredible thing. And when she comes outside, my driver Jimmy is waiting for her, and he's waiting out in the street. He's been waiting in the street the whole time until she comes out. He said to me when he came to see me in the hospital, he said, I go now. So I said, where are you going, Jimmy? He said, I go to your house. I said, what are you going to do there? He says, I'll wait for Mrs. to come out. Maflo, he used to call her. Maflo. I'll wait until Maflo comes out. I wait there for all of the people. And he did. He waited there for hours until Anne came out. And he had the packet of medicines that Dr. Gow had given me. And when Anne came out, Jimmy walks up to her and he says, Maflo, here's your medicines. And when she got into the ambulance, he got in with her and accompanied her back because she had to go to the hospital as well. Everybody had to go to the hospital to be checked up, you see. So there are two things I want to say about the actual process there. The one is Anne's role. She was held for a total of 26 hours by this guy, which is perhaps not a lot, but it's a full day, more than a full day. And Anne's role in calming this guy down was vital to the whole process. I have no doubt about that at all. She never panicked. She never showed hysteria. She kept everyone else calm. And when Chin at one point, he said to her when we'd been evacuated, and she was there with Christine and the baby, and he said to her, things are not working out right. He took the one pistol and he put it under his chin here, and he said to her, he's going to shoot himself. Now, she didn't want to have this guy blowing his brains out in front of her and a 12-year-old child. And she didn't want to see something like that anyway. And, as a Christian, she has respect for human life. So she said to him, in Mandarin, and she managed to command sufficient Mandarin to say this. She said, don't do it. You have a wife and 2 children. They need you. Don't do it. And he held the pistol like this for a while, and he looked at her, and then he took the pistol away. And, that's indicative of how Anne was during this thing. She never got flustered. She never got panicky, and she had a calming effect on everybody during that whole thing. So I learned, and during that experience, I learned to have tremendous respect for my wife's courage and for her ability to handle a crisis. She was just amazing, and she just sorted out things. Then the other thing I want to say is the bullet that wounded me and Melanie. In many ways, that was a miracle bullet, because I asked myself, and I asked the Lord, why did we have to be shot? Why did that have to happen? It truly was a miracle bullet, because I had reached a stage where I was losing patience. I'm not the most patient person in the world, and I was losing patience with the police, with this man, with the whole situation. Nothing was going right. And I was reaching the stage where I would probably have eventually decided I'm going to headbutt this guy in the guts and knock his pistols out of his hand. And that's how I'm going to sort this thing out. But I'm tied up with my hands behind my back and my ankles tied together. What am I going to accomplish to doing something like that? He would have shot me. He would have just shot me, because once I'd headbutted him, I wouldn't have been able to do anything else. And then he would have got his pistol back and he would have put a bullet through my head. I really had to be removed from the situation. I was not the right person to be there for a lengthy period of time, because I was going to do something foolish. I was no longer prepared to accept that nothing was happening. We weren't being, the situation wasn't being resolved. And Melanie and at that stage was a 22-year-old, very attractive young woman, slender and very appealing. And this guy was guilty of rapes and of murder. She wasn't the person that should have stayed behind there. She needed to be got out of there before, because once things had calmed down, who knows what he would have done. She needed to be got out of there. And that bullet got us both out of there. And we were the people who needed to get out. The person who stayed behind was Anne, and Anne was the right person to stay behind because her temperament was such that she could handle that. So that's why I regarded it as a miracle bullet. Nobody wants to be shot, and nobody wants to go through that. But the fact is, the bullet went in one side of my knee and came out the other side. And the other side where it came out, there was quite a nasty gaping hole of broken flesh and so on. When they x-rayed me, the doctors said they don't understand what happened, because if the bullet had gone straight through my knee, it would have gone through bone and shattered the bone. But they said there's no damage to the bone. In fact, there were a few little slivers under my kneecap, and I had to have an arthroscopy about 6 months later, where they had to scrape the kneecap to get rid of those. But that bullet should have shattered my knee. And if it had done that, it wouldn't have continued into Melanie at all. It would have just lodged somewhere in my knee probably, and maybe left me crippled for life. So I said to them, well, maybe it was deflected slightly and it went behind the knee and came out the other side. The doctor said if it did that, it would have had to do a path like this to go out. They said, and that doesn't seem logical. And they said, and it also, if it went behind your knee, it would have severed some of your nerves, and you'd probably have lost the use of your leg completely. So, they regarded that as a miracle bullet from that point of view. In Melanie's case, it missed her spine by centimeters, and it traveled about 15 centimeters inside her pelvic area without touching any of her vital organs or her reproductive organs. And it came to rest between two arteries, which a fraction in either direction, and it would have severed one of those arteries, and she would have bled to death within a few minutes.
Before she left the house.
Within a few minutes, she would have bled to death. So, in so many ways, that was a miracle bullet, and they managed to get it out without major further injury to her. I also have to talk about the support we received from the embassy staff, especially Wouter Badenhorst, the commercial attaché, and his wife, Marisha. They went to great lengths to help us, and they were the ones who looked after our house while we were in hospital, and our cats, and looked after Christine for a while, and the little baby, and all of that sort of things. They were the ones who were amazing when that whole thing took place. And also amazing were the armed forces of Taiwan. It was as though they felt guilty, as if they felt that it was their fault, and it really wasn't. I mean, there was nothing they could have done to prevent that from happening. But they did everything they possibly could to help us. They replaced our whole front door, and they replaced all our windows and everything in the house. You know, they fixed up everything, and they didn't charge us anything for that. Our friends from the church, and from the United Marriage Encounter, an organization that we'd had something to do with, that was focused on enriching marriage experience and so on. It was the American Thanksgiving at that time, and our friends from the church came across, and they held a Thanksgiving dinner at in the wards there for us while we were in hospital. They kept us in hospital for quite a while, probably longer than what they needed to, but they just wanted to be absolutely sure. There was nothing wrong with Anne or with Christine, but they also kept them there for a few days, a day or two, not too long. So then we were in the hospital, and the media were still trying to get to us. They did everything in their power to try. They impersonated doctors and dressed like nurses and tried everything to try and get in there with us. There was a Christian friend that we had, a missionary who had been in Taiwan for more than 20 years, Ina van der Skyf. She was a trained nurse, and she knew that in Taiwan, hospitalization is very different to South Africa. The nurses only do the clinical side. They don't make your bed. They don't wash you. The hospital doesn't feed you. Your family have got to do all that. The family must bring you food. The family must make your bed. Somebody else must come down and do all of those things. The nurses don't do that. They only do concerned with the clinical side of it. And Ina van der Skyf knew that. So she came and moved into the hospital. And she stayed there, and she did everything for us in the hospital. A wonderful woman. She was a Baptist missionary to Taiwan. And she's retired a long time ago now. She's back in South Africa, but what a wonderful person. She spoke Chinese fluently. She understood the whole system. She understood how their hospitals worked. She knew what she could say to the matrons and to the doctors and all the rest of it. So it was wonderful having her there. Then I want to say something about a memorial service I attended. I had agreed before this all happened, before the hostage taking, to attend the memorial service at the Kinkaseki, where the Kinkaseki Japanese prisoner of war camp had been. They had 3 survivors from that camp who were going to attend the service, and a number of ex-servicemen British ex-servicemen living in Taiwan, businessmen and so on, had arranged for this memorial service. And they had a piper to play there, and a couple of Chinese veterans of the Second World War who were there. And I was the only official member of the Commonwealth who could attend something like that in uniform. And I'd agreed to be there and to lay a wreath. And now I'm sitting in hospital. So I decided I'm gonna attend it anyway. So I got Christine, and I think Jimmy went to the house and got my uniform and my medals and everything else, and they brought that to the hospital. And I spoke to one of the doctors, and I said to him, "Look, this is what I want. Are you going to let me go?" So he could see that I was going to go anyway, even if he didn't let me. So he said, "Yes, just don't do anything foolish. Don't overexert yourself, and make sure you come back here." So I said, "Don't worry, I'll make sure of that." And so I dressed in my uniform, and Jimmy got a wheelchair, and I took a blanket and covered myself with a blanket, and I had a baseball cap on and pulled low over my eyes and pulled the blanket right up. And Jimmy got a nurse, and Ina arranged it as well, that it was all sorted out, and the nurse wheeled me out of the front, and there were media people still waiting to get in there to try and photograph us and so on. And they didn't recognize me, and they wheeled me all the way to my official car, and Jimmy helped get me in, and he drove me out to Keelung in the area where, at a little village called Chingwashi, which is where the POW camp used to be, and where the memorial has been built. And so I went out there, and Jimmy had brought my ash cane, which I carried because I needed to walk with a cane but I was able to walk, with a bit of difficulty, but I was okay. And so I used that, and so I attended the service, and I laid the wreath, and the other guys were so impressed that I'd come. They were really grateful to me. They really appreciated it, and it was great. There was some media there, and they were so surprised that, "What are you doing here?" And they took a few photographs and so on, and the next thing I was back in the car, and Jimmy took me back, and again I covered myself with a blanket and the baseball cap, and the nurse came and wheeled me back into the hospital, and we slipped away from the guys for that. So the hospital, the corridors outside our wards You cannot believe the number of bouquets of flowers, orchids, all sorts of expensive. It was just lined with well wishes from all over Taiwan. It was just amazing. But there was a lot of aftermath. In the first place, I had my last clash with the Directorate of Foreign Relations, because what I then found out was that they had sent a message to Shona via the commanding officer. A commanding officer called her in, and Commandant Minnie, she was at I think it was 1 or 2 squadron at that stage where she was working, and he called her in, and he knew me, and he told her that what had happened, and said he would notify her if anything else had happened. That's all. They just said, we've been taken hostage, but at this stage there are no casualties. She didn't know anything else, and they never told her anything else. That Commodore never got hold of her himself, and he never made sure that any messages got to her. I don't think he sent any messages. It just, nothing happened. She was in Hoedspruit, which was far away. She eventually went with her fiancé, and they got leave from the commanding officer, and he let them go back to Pretoria to be with his family, and they watched everything on TV. The only information they got from TV. Now, Shona was obviously very upset about that, and she felt quite resentful because we hadn't actually contacted her. I was under the impression that they'd kept her fully informed, and she knew exactly what was going on, and as soon as they were able to, they would let her speak to me. That never happened. And when I confronted this Commodore, who's now a rank higher than me, I said to him, "Sir, I don't appreciate the way you've gone to work with us. I think you've made a hash of this sort of thing. You've blown the whole thing. Why didn't you tell my daughter about it?" I'd never spoken to a senior officer like the way I spoke to him that day. And he said, "You don't understand. I've got 30 different missions around the country, 30 different attaches that I've got to deal with. I can't spend all my attention on one." I said to him, "Sir, when I was a second lieutenant, I had 34 people under my command in my platoon. I had to know everything about each one of those people. I had to know what their home situation was like. You have no idea what my home situation is like. You've never even spoken to me before since I've been out here. And now you tell me you've got other people, you've got more than 30 people. You've got a second lieutenant's job and you can't do it. And you're a Commodore." Yeah, that guy was, I was livid because of what he'd done. He was so angry with me. He said to me, we're going to give you and your family an opportunity. You can come home to rest for a few weeks. I said to him, "Sir, don't you understand? I'm in the middle of closing down the office over here. I haven't got time to go on holidays now. You might not be interested in doing your job, but I'm interested in doing my job. I'm closing down this mission before I go back to South Africa. So you can take your holiday and do what you like with it." He'd ignored me after that. He put down the phone, and I never heard another word from him. Never. He never ever came back to me. He never spoke to me when I got back to South Africa. Neither he nor anybody else came near me. That was the end of my relationship with DFR, except for Sharon. Sharon still held the fort and still kept us going and looked after us. But nobody else did. Nobody else did. That guy, I don't know the man. I don't know anything about him. But that's his fault, not mine. He was the superior officer. And I really got angry with him, but I'm not sorry I did. And he was very angry with me, but that's his business. I'm glad that was the end of my dealings with DFR, because as far as I was concerned, they were a bunch of clowns. But that's just my opinion. Who am I? Anyway, we didn't want to be, but we'd become celebrities in the Far East. And not just in Taiwan, all over the place. People knew about us. We were interviewed on TV and on radio. We had invitations to speak, particularly Christine, because when she'd gone out of the garage and refused to go and join the policeman and turned around and gone back in, that had been on TV. The TV screens had shown that. And people thought that she was the most wonderful person in the world. And she was asked to speak at schools and at churches, and so were we, and Rotary clubs and all sorts of things. So, we were speaking to people all over the place. And then our church came to us and said, look, we've been thinking a lot about this, and we thought perhaps it would be a good idea if you made some sort of gesture towards Chin at this stage. So we thought about it, and we decided, yes, that's what we would do. So on the 16th of December, now we're getting close to the time we got to go back. Only 2 weeks to go. But 16th of December was Anne's 50th birthday. And we managed to get permission to see Chin just before one of his court appearances. And we went through and met him in the corridor in shackles and chains as he was about to appear before the judge for another hearing. And they said to us, you've got 3 minutes with him, that's all.
He's a dangerous man.
He's a very dangerous man, and we can't. So we had taken Chris Dippenaar with us, the language expert, the missionary. And we had got a Chinese Bible, and we'd got some Chinese tracts explaining the way of salvation. And we spoke to him, because Anne was the one who spent the time with him. Chris's wife had made some cookies and cakes and so on, and to give him. But as soon as we produced that, the guards took that away. They said, no, we'll check these first. And then I don't know if they thought we'd put a file in there or something like that, but then we'll give it to him. But then Anne said a couple of things to him, because we'd said we knew we didn't have time to have a long discussion. So she said a few things to him. She gave these things to him. She said, the first thing is, we've forgiven you for what you've done to us. We've forgiven you. God will also forgive you if you're prepared to accept his son, Jesus Christ, as your Savior. She said, there are not hundreds of lives. You only have this one life. There's no reincarnation. You can't come back later and make up for what you've done this time. This is the only life there is, and if you don't make your decision now, then you're lost. You need to accept Christ now. And before she could say anything more, the guard said, no, time's up, you've got to go now. And so they left him. They left us, and they took him into the court, and we had to go. And so that was what happened. But there were other impacts from a Christian point of view. We were contacted by a lot of missionaries. And a lot of them said to us, particularly after we'd been to see Chen, and people had seen that, we actually went to him and we said to him, we forgive you. And when people asked us about it, we said, no, we've forgiven him for what he did. Christian missionaries who'd been in Taiwan for 20 years contacted us and said, it's so difficult to witness to a Buddhist because to them, they'll accept Jesus, but it's just another one of the panoply of gods. And they don't fully understand what is happening. And we just can't get people to talk to us about salvation. She said, but after what happened to you people and the way you reacted towards Chen, said people are coming to us and they're saying, what is this Christian love that these people are talking about? What is this forgiveness that they're talking about? Tell us about it. We don't understand. Tell us about this. And they said, and we've now got an open door to witness to people. And it's making our ministry worthwhile as missionaries in Taiwan. So that was very encouraging for us to get that sort of feedback from them. There were 2 Christian videos made of the events. One was called The Longest Day, which was made by the Overseas Radio and Television Incorporated, which is a Baptist, not a Baptist, but a Christian missionary. It's a missionary fellowship that operates in Taiwan. And the other one was called The Intruder. And it was produced by the Baptist Mass Communication Center and used by them in their missionary training program. So that was very encouraging to find that as well. So I then had to finish packing up and all the farewells and so on that we had to go, and I had to close down my office. Of course, what happened to us had a major effect on our family. It was very hard for Melanie to say, I forgive this man. She was very bitter about what he'd done to us as a family and to us as individuals. She was very resentful about that. And we understand that. And, that is how she was affected by it. Shona was very resentful because we had not, as far as she was concerned, contacted her and kept her in the picture and shown our concern for her as well during all of this. And everything was just about us in Taiwan and about the family and about what had happened to us, and nobody even thought about her. Certainly the director of foreign relations never thought about her. It wasn't important to him. Christine became a huge problem. She was now the center of attraction. Everybody thought she was just the most wonderful person. And she was in demand wherever she went. And if she'd appear in public anywhere, people would look at her and say, "You're Christine, you're Christine." And please sign this, give us an autograph and so on. And children would crowd around her at the schools that she was asked to speak at and so on. And then I was presented with the Order of the Resplendent Banner before I left Taiwan. Now, we had stopped in South Africa, we had stopped presenting the Taiwanese people. Normally, if an attaché has done a good job, he gets awarded with a decoration at the end of it by the host country. But we'd stopped doing that to the Taiwanese because we were falling over ourselves to please the communist Chinese at that stage. I have no doubt at all that Taiwanese had no intention of giving me a decoration if we're not giving their attachés decorations. But I think they felt so guilty about what had happened to us, and were so upset about it that they presented me with the Order of the Resplendent Banner, and it was a moving, formal reception, a ceremony, and really something quite special. So I wear that thing quite proudly. I'm proud that they did consider giving it to me. So we had all of these sort of things going on at the time. We came back via Hong Kong again, and even at the airport when we had to leave, we had journalists trying to interview us at the airport, and we were so sick and tired of those guys by then. We stopped over for a day in Hong Kong before we took our next flight back, and we were walking down the street in Hong Kong, and people were recognizing Christine and saying, "We saw you on television. You're Christine." And Christine just thought that this was wonderful, and when we were flying back to South Africa, she said, "I suppose when we get to South Africa at the airport, there are going to be crowds of people waiting to receive her." I said, "Sweetie, there's not going to be anybody there." She said, "No, but we're famous now. The people are all going to see us. They're all going to be pleased to see us back." And I said, "Sweetie, prepare yourself. There's not going to be anybody there." And when we got back, there was nobody there except Sharon. Sharon was the only one there to meet us. And she took us to where our car had been stored, and we were able to get that out of storage, and then we were able to leave. I was posted as the SSO Ops at Far North Command. Nobody from DFR, from the Directorate of Foreign Relations, ever asked us anything about the hostage. They never came back to it, about the hostage taking. We were never debriefed. Nobody in the Defense Force ever debriefed us. Even though special forces had by then been identified as the people who would do hostage release, and they were responsible for doing that in any embassy where it happened overseas. We weren't interviewed by them. Nobody thought, well, what are the lessons we can learn from this? I wrote a full report about it, a full report and everything, a detailed report, and I sent that in to DFR. Never heard a word. Nobody came back to me. So, my feeling with the way that they handled the whole thing was, if that's your attitude, well, So much for you. I've got better things to do than waste my time with clowns like you.
Jim actually.
So we went to Petersburg, or now Polokwane, to the headquarters of Far North Command, and I got stuck into my new job there. Our second daughter, Shona, got married a month after we returned. You know, for Anne especially, what we went through, it was 2 weeks after her father had died. She'd then seen her husband and her daughter getting shot. The tension of 26 hours as a hostage.
The baby.
2 weeks after that, little Zachary that we'd had for the past 5 months or so had to go back to America, or to his new adoptive parents. So it was parting with this little baby, which he'd become a part of our lives. So that was very hard for her. Then it was the move, which is always a traumatic experience, and settling into a new town and a new house and a new community in Petersburg. There were so many things happening, and then our youngest daughter's wedding, and because we'd been away and so on, we weren't really involved in all the arrangements for the wedding and so on. And it was a very stressful time for us as a family, but particularly for Anne. So, well, surely we were counseled psychologically for all of this. There were no English-speaking counselors in Taiwan. There was nobody who could counsel us there. So the first time we received any counseling at all was 6 months after the event. And that was only because, and in Petersburg, I was speaking to the commander of the medical command in that area, who had been one of my staff college students. And he was speaking to me, and he said to me, who debriefed you? Weet julle ontlont? Who were the people who gave you psychological counseling? I said to him, what psychological counseling? And he was horrified. He said, you should have had psychological counseling within 24 hours of that happening. You've had no counseling. He said, I'm going to arrange that for you now. So he did, but that was 6 months after it had happened. It seems that's a little bit of a contrast when you compare it to, for instance, the ordeal that Collier and Monique Stradom went through a couple of years later in the year 2000, when they were captured in Malaysia, and they were held hostage for 4 months on the island of Jolo. Now, on their release, Anne read a report that the SANDF had sent a military psychologist to counsel those people, traumatized South African citizens, but civilians, after their hostage experience. Yet we, who were military people, nobody, the director of foreign relations, you would think that if he was really concerned about it, one of the first things he would have done was to contact the medics and say, can you guys send a guy over there to debrief them now, to counsel them now? I know there's nobody who's English speaking in Taiwan who can do it, but he wouldn't have known that because he didn't know anything about Taiwan from what I could figure out. But anyway, he didn't do that. So it was 6 months later before we got any sort of counseling at all. We don't know whether there was actually a military psychologist sent for Monique and Kali Stradom. That's not mentioned in their book at all. So, probably it wasn't. But it just gives you, it left a bit of a bitter residue in Annie's psyche, and she had to, it added to the fact that she developed severe depression. And from about 6 months after this happened, and she was feeling guilty that she'd emerged unscathed from the gun battle, while her husband and one daughter were both shot and wounded. Her other daughter had been bereft of all information of what was going on while we were going through. So for about 2 years, she had to be treated for severe depression as a result. So the whole experience certainly affected our family. It was it was the commencement of a period of rebelliousness and with Christine and behavioral problems, which eventually led to her getting into drugs and all sorts of other things. Because she found when she got back, she went to school in Petersburg. She thought everybody would see her as a celebrity, you know. The kids, they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know what I said to her, sweetie, it's a flash in the pan. It's the sort of thing that is headlines in South Africa today. And tomorrow, nobody talks about it anymore. In a week's time, everybody's forgotten about it. And you've got to accept that's the way news works. But she didn't want to accept that. And so she started doing things to get attention because she wasn't getting the attention she expected she would get. And it led to a lot of problems with her. And then our eldest daughter, a year later, she married Michael, who'd been the guy that she contacted in the newsroom and so on. And he was, of course, an American, so she went to live in America, which was a loss to us. But, you know, it also gave us lots of opportunities to go to America and to meet people over there and to travel a bit. So it wasn't all negative by any means. And, of course, there are wonderful opportunities for our children over there. And, you know, I'm wearing Boston University hoodie now. My eldest daughter, granddaughter, is at the university at Boston. So, you know, I'm quite chuffed about that. You know, what then happened was we got letters from Christian organizations, the prison visitation people in Taiwan. The pastor who handles that sort of thing, who is still a Facebook friend of mine to this day, we were informed that Chen Shing, as a result of their prison ministry and the witnessing that they had done to him based on what Anne had told him when we had met with him and his experience with us during the hostage taking, Chen accepted the Lord and was converted. And he was baptized in a prison, and we were told that he led 2 other prisoners to the Lord as well. So you know, there was a dramatic change in his life. Now, it's not for me to say. You know, people say, "But how do you know his conversion was genuine?" I don't know that. That's between him and the Lord. It's not for me to say, to judge him for that. But I know that this is what happened. He then wrote to Anne. He wrote a letter to her, which was translated by the Christian Chinese and sent to Anne. And in it, he asked her if she would be prepared if we would be prepared to adopt his 2 sons. We considered it very seriously, but we realized that at the age that we were at, we would be in our 70s and have teenagers to deal with. But I have to say that we're now in our 70s and we've got a 7-year-old that we're looking after now. So no, I don't know whether that was good reasoning on our part at that stage. But anyway, his 2 sons, they were victimized in Taiwan because of their father. And they eventually were given up for adoption, and they were adopted in the USA. And went to Christian families in the USA. I completed my honors degree, and then I also was prompted by other people to write the story of our hostage taking. So it was published. I couldn't get anyone to publish it in South Africa. I even contacted Christian book publishers, but they weren't interested. So I found a publisher in America. So it was published in America. It is available from Amazon, and it's also available on, what do they call it? Kindle. You can buy a Kindle version, which is generally cheaper than the hard copy. So Chen Shin was tried. We heard that his wife was retried and was declared innocent and was released from prison. We also had stories that she was later arrested again and retried and sent to prison, but we don't know whether that's true or not. Chen himself was tried, and he was found guilty of, I don't know, he got 4 or 5 death sentences. He got 5 or 6 life sentences, and he got about 70 or 80 years, other prison sentences and so on. And 2 years after we'd been taken hostage, he was executed. 4 years after the incident, we were invited to return to Taiwan because a Chinese language version of our book was published, and we were invited there for the launch of this book. So we returned to Taiwan, and I was able to speak at the national prayer breakfast that they had there. And we met with the president. It was a new president in Taiwan, and we actually had an audience with him and met with him in his in the presidential palace. And we were hosted in the town of Kaohsiung in the south of Taiwan, where Frank Shear, the lawyer who helped negotiate the release, had become the mayor of Kaohsiung. So he went on to have a successful political career. And then in 2007, shortly after I'd retired from the regular force, we were approached by Raw TV. They were making a series for National Geographic called Locked Up Abroad, and the same series being used for the British Channel 5 TV called Banged Up Abroad. And Anne and Christine and I were flown to Johannesburg. We were interviewed for many, many hours over 2 days. They only used parts of the interview with me and Christine. They also flew Melanie to London and interviewed her there, and also used parts of the interview with her. And our story appeared in the second series, in episode 11 of the second series, where it was entitled Locked Up Abroad, Taiwan. It's a sort of thing that's known as a docudrama. It's a combination of original video footage from the news organizations, interviews with participants, and then reenactments by professional actors. So very well done, a very, very good, little things I could find fault with, but generally I think it was a very good portrayal of what took place. We were contacted by many people as a result of that, and the episode can still be viewed if people go into the Locked Up Abroad aspect on the internet. And then in 2019, 22 years after the incident, we were contacted by an organization known as Peddling Pictures in Singapore. They were producing a series called The Negotiators for Channel News Asia. And they were focusing on how negotiations were carried out during crisis situations. And so we were flown to Singapore for 3 days, and we were interviewed at length over there. I was as sick as a dog. I had a mouthful of sores, and I really felt ill, and I had difficulty speaking. But they were determined to interview us, and they did. And I think, despite the fact that I looked like an old man about to expire because of my illness, and that I had great difficulty articulating my words, I think they did a very good job. It was only a 4-episode series. Ours was the first one, and it was called Taipei Hostage Crisis. It was also a docudrama, also involved original footage, as well as interviews, as well as portrayals by professional actors. And the following year, in 2000, that production won a Rocky Award for excellence in global television and digital content in the documentary and factual crime and investigation category. So that's also available on the internet and can be viewed. So, yeah. So, Chris, that brings us to the end of the drama, and I'm sorry I've really gone on for a long time, but it was really important that I think that I tried to get across, because a lot of people ask a lot of questions about this, and I can tell you I haven't even covered half of what actually happened, but I managed to put quite a lot into the book, although my editor for the publishers also cut out some of the stuff that I put in there as well. So, but it's a pretty good portrayal in the book. So